Hello, Irenicast listeners. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to give you a heads up in the beginning. We had some technical difficulties this week, so our audio quality isn't up to the standard that you may be used to if you're a regular listener to the show. However, the content of our episode this week is on par with the quality that we usually bring you here at Irenicast. So without any further ado, enjoy this week's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast. I'm your host, Jeff, and with me, as always, are my co-hosts, Mona and Alan. We are post-evangelical ministers and theological thinkers grappling with our place in the progressive Christian world. Thank you for joining us for another conversation on faith and culture. This week, we are going to be exploring the subject of the art versus the artist, the message versus the messenger, or the theology versus the theologian. And for our segment, we're going to be bringing back an old segment called Say What. But before we get to our conversation today, we have a couple announcements for you. You were listening to this, if you're listening on the day of post, September 27, 2016. And I don't know how many of you listening, or even my illustrious co-host, realize that this Friday, September 30th, is International Podcast Day. And it's right.
Amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. And we are going to be celebrating accordingly, showing our thankfulness for the medium, the platform that has given us a voice. And we are going to be releasing a bonus episode on International Podcast Day. And unfortunately, Mona and Alan will not be joining me for that episode, but I'm bringing in former guest host Adam, as well as former guest host from all the way back from episode 19, Dylan Van Lant. And we are going to be doing a film critique of the movie God's Not Dead. Just look at that movie and kind of deconstruct the themes a little bit. So if you're interested in that, you'll check your feed and it'll be right there for you. And if you're not subscribed already, you should do that on either iTunes or Google Play. And that way, when that episode airs, it'll be right there on your phone or device or whatever. So I think that's all the announcements we have for now. With that aside, let's get into our subject. So our subject is theology versus theologian, or art versus the artist. And basically the premise here, this was kind of a subject that I wanted to bring to the table. The premise here was sort of inspired by a couple things. Is number one, finding out recently, one of my favorite theologians / writers, John Howard Yoder, love his stuff. Recently found out that there is a massive cloud above John Howard Yoder as far as allegations of sexual assault and violence towards women and all kinds of awful, atrocious things. Similar in line with all the things that we're seeing in the news about Bill Cosby and all the wonderful things that he created with the show and even his art, and now all these horrible, ugly, disgusting allegations. I guess it's allegations. It sure feels like it's more than that. And then in addition to a movie that's coming out soon called Birth of a Nation, which is a really important film about the black slave experience in our country, and allegations of the director had rape allegations against him, and actually him and another person in college, one of which was actually sent to prison for the crimes, and he just faced trial but was acquitted, I believe, Nate Parker. And how that's clouded this movie that could be really important, and by all intents and purposes from critics so far is a really, really well done movie. And So this is an interesting question I think that we could tackle here on the show is, when does a creator, someone who's bringing something to people, whether it's theology or art or whatever, when does their work become devalued, and when can we, when should, or if we cast aside their work because of what they've done or who they are?
The Yoder thing is like really personal for me as well. John Howard Yoder's stuff was very influential in my development as a pacifist, especially tied to my Christianity. And he was influential for people that I really looked up to, like Shane Claiborne and others, formed kind of this really big legacy. And to find out that somebody who speaks about pacifism and violently forces themselves on, I think the number was like 50 to 100 different women. I read an article by Lisa Church, who is one of the Mennonite women who is involved in theology, makes the claim that John Howard Yoder affected generations of pacifistic theologians, especially Mennonite women. Like, some of the victims were his peers at the time. Some of them were students. And the way that the church handled the controversy basically affected women's presence in that context for generations. That there's she says she can't even think of one woman who is a like Yoder theologian who studies his work as their primary focus. So it's a big deal. And I mean, he was one of the most well-known pacifistic theologians in the world at the time. So um, what do you do with that is a good question. You know, how do you reinterpret some of the stuff that he wrote in light of now knowing the way that he acted at the time he was writing this stuff? I think so. I have a hard time getting away from. I have some ideas about this, but I'm really glad Jeff is bringing it up because I don't know what to think sometimes. Absolutely.
It's funny. It's I talked about Tillich the last couple of weeks, and Tillich is one of my favorite theologians. But Tillich had a famous affair. He had several famous affairs, I understand, with students and whatnot. But I think he traveled around with his mistress, and for a period of time, his mistress even lived in the house, even though his wife like vehemently opposed that, and it caused a lot of discord in his home. It's still this really strange, like forced polyamorous relationship, I think. So it's really interesting that a lot of theological figures have really strange, if not incredibly unhealthy, if not violently aggressive and abusive sexual proclivities in particular. So I don't know what to do with that.
Obviously, the individuals are to blame for their actions. They're responsible agents for what they've done. But you also look at the context of a very patriarchal culture historically and places of power that basically go unquestioned, right? Like ministers, theologians, professors, things that traditionally you didn't scrutinize. And so that like unhealthy mix allowed that stuff in some ways to kind of fester.
But
so
it didn't cause it though. I mean,
no,
it's mind-boggling.
Right.
It's mind-boggling, that these behaviors can even exist or happen at all.
Yeah.
And with people who utter eloquently beautiful words that lift people to the divine, I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, because there's all that stuff that goes with it, like something like with Yoder, and even outside of the theological sphere, like Cosby. I mean, was dubbed for the longest time like America's dad. It's especially hard because the things that they put forward are the exact opposite of the things that they were doing.
Right, when the action itself contradicts the very message that's being sent.
Yeah, and not only that, but then we have like our Protestant forefathers are all deplorable people as well. So then where's that line between like historical context? I would argue that for Yoder and Cosby, historical context doesn't matter, because even within that context, what they did was pretty horrible. But then you go back into, theologians that were slave owners, and then you go into the horrible anti-Semitic stuff with Martin Luther and all this stuff. I mean, you can go back into our own scripture and David, and how David handled his relationship with women, and yet dubbed man after God's own heart. You know what I mean? Like, so it seems to be this thing that happens all the way through. And I wonder if at the heart of it, at least, is this idea that, Paul talked about in Romans, that you do what you don't want to do and all this kind of stuff. But just that psychological thing is that sometimes the things that we're doing are trying to compensate for something that we already are. So maybe the reason that the message of Yoder especially was so opposite from what he was actually doing, because maybe he was just trying to present an ideal, not just for people, but desperately for himself as well. Not that that's an excuse. Of course, I don't want to say that.
Sort of. Him specifically, there's also some interesting things that he was writing right around the time of his death that were basically long form explanations for justifications for what he did, kind of. And sort of like victim blaming. That's how people have read it. And I think even one witness or one victim said he was like trying to establish some new sort of Christian sexual ethics. I think it's important to know that like he supposedly he might have had some affairs, but in his like forceful stuff, he molested, and I don't think nobody ever said they were raped by him. Like he didn't have sex with them. But anyway, he was actually developing in his mind these big theological justifications for what he did, So it's like,
wow.
I don't know. Yeah, it's pretty bad. And but I even think of people like in other circles too, like Mark Driscoll, right? he's this person who represents for a lot of people what being biblically founded and faithful to God looks like, but he's kind of a dick and has been abusive behind the scenes and the way he's handled people who are under his authority. And you start to question the message, right? And that's
Well, at least for him, his message was consistent with.
that's true. There was a little bit less of a discrepancy, but like, if you want to go all the way to like the Hitler thing, everybody always uses that, right? In these scenarios, what would happen if Hitler was involved? Well, there actually were. There is a whole bunch of medical science that was done in the name of like furthering humanity at the expense of people who were in concentration camps. And it's like, what do you do with that? What do you do with the medical quote unquote discoveries that like were done at other people's expenses without their consent?
The UN sealed them. That's what they did with it.
Think so.
The UN sealed it from
Yeah.
nobody can use that research because they
Right.
don't want to set a precedent for benefiting off people's pain for medical purposes.
Right. I think it's important though, for me and in my conception of reality, that like, and this is actually made in Lisa Search's article that I read. At the time Yoder did some of this stuff, it might not even be considered criminal. Like it might have been good taste, but there wasn't the evolved ethics that we have now toward like sexual misconduct and harassment and stuff like that. We actually have the criminal language now, but she says it's still important to name that as criminal,
We
even
have
if
victims'
society,
of rights.
yeah,
Mm.
even if society hadn't gotten to the point. So if you look back at slavery, like slavery was criminal. It may have been justified by the state, but it's a crime against humanity, you know, against our humanity. So I think it's important for me to look back at, or even the founder of Planned Parenthood, right? Didn't she dabble in eugenics and
Yeah.
like racism and stuff? Even though there's good things that came out of it, like really good things, it makes you wonder. I mean, should we even expect people to be absolutely perfect in everything they do? Probably not. Is it worse when their like life contradicts like the absolute definition of their message?
Yeah, it seems to me like we're talking about individuals in particular because it seems like organizations that are founded or entities, like they can absolutely be besmirched by horrible scandals. Like a lot of religious communities have such scandals and things like that. But it seems like there's an element of being able to recover from that because that entity is bigger than the founder, it's bigger than a single person. But when it comes to someone's art or their body of writing, they've devoted their life to creating. It's very difficult when their personal credibility falls apart and they're no longer seen as someone to follow or emulate or look up to. And what happens? I think the question we're trying to answer is like, what happens to their body of work? Is
Their
it
message,
still
right?
their message? Is it still art for art's sake? I mean, I still like Bill Cosby is a good example. His comedy was so. And I think this is why everyone was so shocked when all of the allegations started coming to the fore because his comedy was so, in many ways, it was considered very wholesome and very real and very family oriented and very moral. I mean, this is like so different than the private life that he apparently led. And I think it feels like a betrayal to a lot of people who loved him and loved his art. And
Yeah, well, not only Bill Cosby's comedy, but his show, The Cosby Show, was monumental for African Americans in our country. Like, it was a big shift from the family, like having the black neighbors, or even a step forward from the Jeffersons before that, as far as like it was a black family in a situation that you did not see, and you still don't even see all that much in TV today in a prominent upper middle class, professional setting and nuclear family or whatever we want to call it. Like, that show is and was very significant, and I think what makes that harder to go through is the fact that it was called The Cosby Show. Like, it wasn't just a character. You got the sense that when you saw Cliff Huxtable, it was Bill Cosby, which was weird. It was called The Cosby Show, but his character was Cliff Huxtable, and you like that. That's really much more difficult to really delineate in your mind. Like, how do you reconcile that, and then how do you, as an African American, I can't even imagine, reconcile that. Like, this was significant, and then what do you do with that work? When does the work become null, or is it like a temporary thing? Like, I can't go back and watch The Cosby Show. But is that temporary? Like in 5 years from now, am I going to be able to stop and rewatch it and appreciate it for what it was? Or how long is that?
Not.
That's what my question was. Like, there have been famous people in history had like weird, strange things about them, but their work survived them, and they, in 100 or 500 years, people are still reading it. So
I think it's the opposite. I think we're now realizing it's important to read the social history of their context, their everyday life, who they were as a person, in interpreting their work. I think before there was this like heady division between thoughts and ideas and what we are, and regular life didn't matter as much. You look at all the classical Greek texts and stuff, right? These are these amazing, but the real lives of people help us interpret what they have created. And I think that
that's really good. I like that.
Looking back at like Cosby, it's harder. It's a bigger fall than maybe even Yoder. Yoder's work was very academic. It was books. It was kind of thought life, right? Bill Cosby is more like an embodied thing. He is the message. Like his life and who he was, his presence was like the icon. It was no longer just him. It was something bigger than him. But his message was him, that you can appreciate life and live that way as a viable option. So if Yoder were more like his, one of his followers or whatever, Shane Claiborne, whose message was, hey, I'm going to actually take nonviolence and communal living and put it into practice, and we're going to do this together. And he wrote books based on that as like a very embodied thing. It would be different, So basically what I'm trying to say is I think that we reinterpret just out of necessity the things that people have said or created once like we get to know them as a real human being. And the more their message is about themselves, the harder it is to reinterpret that in a good way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it's responsible criticism to take that into account when you're looking at someone's artwork. I mean, look at
without tossing it out, right? To reinterpret it.
Yeah.
Well, it presumes that like what you're saying is really significant in saying that like nobody can create disembodied knowledge or art. It's always contextual. It's always from their perspective.
Yes.
So they are always an inextricable part of the work. Is that what we're agreeing on? Because then what about works that are anonymous or works that we don't know who the author was, like from antiquity, that's still considered art? Like that person could have been a total asshole, but we don't know. So is it like what you don't know can't kill the art? Or like, should we just not inquire into those things? Because maybe at the end of the day, like all art would be ruined because people have horrible things about them. Most people have like issues and problems that are broken.
That's why I love ruthlessly honest creators, people who are dealing with the human condition and themselves. I just think of Kurt Vonnegut, honestly, like people who are like interpreting not through values of what they want to be, but of who they are, and
so
maybe that's low art or something. Lower. No,
I would say that's high art, and like maybe the art that doesn't really expose someone's soul or show you who they really are is like a gimmick. It's like it's a caricature. It's a fiction. It's not actually art.
But sometimes it's a useful fiction, right? Like I'm thinking of Martin Luther King. I don't know. I haven't like researched all of his life, but I know that there were allegations that he had affairs and stuff like that in the middle of his ministry. His books are like Strength to Love, so central and crucial to me, like who I am as a Christian, and the fact that he had affairs like doesn't take that away necessarily, even though he's helping me aspire to be something even better than he was or I was or we were. But that was his message, right? We as a community can aspire to things that we're not currently at. There has to be an element of us liking heroes falling, right? We love it. We love it when a good hero collapses and shows their real personhood. And we almost cherish it because it helps us cope with the fact that we're not attaining what we want to be.
I have something really controversial to offer here.
Do it.
I don't know if I so much resonate with what you're saying, Alan. I mean, I feel a personal feeling of disgust when heroes fall and tragedy.
Right.
But I always wonder, like, what happened to that person to make them abusive, or to, because I like behaviors that are unfortunate or irresponsible are one thing, but to actually like abuse and harm other people is another, right? So I always wonder though, because most people who do those things have had horrible things done to them, or they're undergoing a life of such pressure and stress that they have to find outlets somewhere because they're not getting enough care themselves, right? And I think, I don't know about the Dr. King situation, but it probably was something like that given what his career was like. I not to say that justifies it, but all to say, it's interesting to me the thought, and this is like really shaky ground that I'm on, so I love your feedback. But it's really interesting the thought that perhaps people who have a lot of issues tend to dabble into areas of brilliance, like mentally, like things and thoughts, and they go into like stratospheres that other people who have like very healthy, solid relationships don't go into because they're either escaping or they're pushed in those directions. Does that kind of make sense?
Like, yeah, like the classic author who is tortured but creates this amazing, beautiful, like All Quiet on the Western Front, right? The author is depressed and dealing with just terrible things, but we look at their work and it's just next level. Like you said, stratosphere.
All the great painters are like that too. I mean,
right.
It's amazing.
Yeah. We have that with the whole, kind of like the 90s grunge scene, like it was all this angst and stuff coming out in their art. And, you mentioned something along with that is that idea of when your art is noticed, that gives you a semblance of power. And the more it's noticed, the more power you have. And power, like, literally changes our brain and puts us in a place to be less empathetic towards other people. I mean, I was listening to, I think it was a recent episode of the Hidden Brain podcast, and they talk about this idea, how strong, powerful, like we have measured results of people becoming less empathetic the more power they get.
It makes sense. I mean, it's a classic superhero or god complex. Sometimes fame and credibility and power makes people think like they're above the rules, that they're better than others, that there won't be consequences for what they do, and they can just literally take whatever they want.
And sometimes it's true.
but that means that capability lies within all of us.
So where's the line? Where do we say this person's work is invalid or shouldn't be recognized? How many people own one of Hitler's paintings before he rose to power? Like, where's that line?
The irony is that Hitler, like in his personal life, was actually like a really moral, like spotless kind of. I don't think he had any like personal scandals to speak of that we know about. Dude, that's the weirdest part of this. I don't understand it. Like, you would think that people would be like all nasty people or good people, and that's not the way life works.
If you want to, that just popped into my head. There's a GIF out there of Hitler like signing autographs, and a woman tries to kiss him, and it's like this really humanizing moment, and you're like, man, I don't want that person to be humanized, right? Or seeing Trump going on Jimmy Fallon and having him humanized, it's like, I don't. So I guess it works both ways. You see somebody that's this paragon of human virtue, and they really screw up, and you see these people who are terrible despots and evil people who have these bright shining moments of humanity.
Did you just call Trump a despot and evil? I don't.
Hitler.
Okay.
Sorry, Hitler.
All right.
I was thinking of Hitler. I jumped back to.
Okay, just to clarify.
No. I'm not saying he's a despot. I am saying Hitler was. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
But I think the point for me is like it works both ways. It's easy to demonize people that we know do very and I'm going to say sinful because that's how I interpret it, or unjust or evil things. They're still people, they're still human beings, and people who are these amazing icons that are pulling us towards something better, they're also still people. And so I think it has to be reinterpreted both ways.
Yes, but at the same time, it also has to reflect, like, I think this goes back to the idea of like the inner whatever. Like, don't get, well, you already got me started on the whole Jimmy Fallon Trump thing. I thought that was deplorable and ridiculous that, anyway, I even tweeted, follow me on Twitter at Jeff Manildi, and I even tweeted, I retweeted a clip of when Trump was on David Letterman's show, and David Letterman used that opportunity to call him out on his bullcrap in a way that was entertaining and fun, as opposed to like making him out to be this like anyway,
showing his childhood home.
Yeah, which would have been different if it was like a representation of a change that was happening. That's one thing. You know what I mean? Like if it was like, okay, here's Trump, he's done all this stuff, and now he's trying to like, he genuinely had some kind of change, and now he's really trying to represent himself. But that wasn't it. It was a PR thing. You know, it's that balance between when is the art really reflective of the person themselves. Like it's interesting because you can even see in their art the struggle, and sometimes with fictional art, it's even more obvious because maybe they feel like they have more freedom to kind of express things beyond than if they were just being literal with what they were talking about. Like look at Mel Gibson's movies, the ones that he's directed, Braveheart, Passion of the Christ, and now this new one coming out, I forget the name of it. But they're all these freedom fighters, these people who want to make lives better for everyone else in the midst of extremely violent situations. And you can't not separate that from middle to late-aged man who is a devout Catholic and all the guilt and everything associated with that kind of upbringing and the things that you read about online about his upbringing and all that kind of stuff. Like those things are a part of who he is, and those struggles are coming out in the fiction that they're writing.
Yeah, but that's not the whole sum of those things. I'm inclined to say, after this conversation, I actually walked into this not knowing actually what I thought about this, and I think I'm inclined to say that I really do think you should separate the art from the artist and the theology from the theologian. I really think that work should be judged on its own merit. I honestly do. Now, in the case of The Cosby Show, yes, watching that now would make me feel queasy. I read this the other day. I thought it was really fascinating. The phenomenon of disgust that people feel is a result of a sense of contamination that boundaries have been crossed that should not be crossed. And it's a natural, necessary evolutionary phenomenon. If we don't experience the feeling of disgust, we actually fail to survive, right? Because you eat poison or you break boundaries and you interbreed and you don't survive as a species. So that's like a really necessary evolutionary trait that we possess. So when we have food disgust, it means that there's contamination, the boundaries been crossed. If you have emotional disgust, it means that a taboo or a boundary has been crossed that makes you feel unsafe. So I think when that disgust kicks in, I think it's a natural, right? It's a natural response saying like something has been violated here and I no longer want any part of it. And I think that's an important thing to listen to.
Then what extent would you say that the art needs to be separated from the artist? Like out of the three of us, Mona, you are the artist. Like I would consider you an artist with everything that you do. Very talented one, by the way.
Thank you.
I thought your guys' creativity episode said we all are. And here I was thinking I was an artist.
Alan feels left out.
Alan feels left out. All right. Well, she has a higher degree of artistry than we have. But to what extent do you want people to evaluate your art separated from you and your context and what it came from? Like,
I hope it lives beyond me. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that I paint makes no sense unless you know me and you know the story behind it. Like I talked about the painting of the toothbrushes or something. And I paint a lot of things that are like in my psyche or whatever, and music too. But the whole point of creating is so that something lives beyond you and becomes bigger than you and becomes more than you. It's like having a child. Like I don't hope to control every aspect of my child's life or their personality or what they go on to do.
But you certainly want to celebrate the things that influence the things that they do. Like that's what I'm saying is that how, like, to what extent is that?
They'll always be a part of me. They'll always be a part of me because they're my child.
Exactly.
But they're not me. And I think in the same way, my art is not me. It's something different than me. It's something I created, but it takes on a life of its own.
But it came from you and it has pieces of you. So like what? Like I don't know how you can't. Both. Yeah, it's both. So I don't know if we can say that you need to take into account an art in of itself, like, because then when that art comes, like when I like, let's say for instance, I look at one of your paintings and it came from a very personal place from you, but so is the nature of art. You put it out there, and that's good art gives everyone a space to find a way to connect to that particular piece. But isn't that kind of the point of art, is to all give us a place where we have common ground, even though that common ground we relate to in different ways, and to separate that from the people or from even the creator that created it. I don't know.
So let me ask you this. Is it possible for people to write great fiction about worlds that they've never seen or experiences that they've never had?
Sure.
No.
Sure.
Great? No.
Yes, I think so.
Then the Lord of the Rings wouldn't exist. Okay.
No, that's not true, because there are
rhetorical
themes.
question.
There are themes in there. Like, they can create worlds, but there's still themes in there that I believe that great work always is connected to themes that either the author is struggling with or is experienced or is a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yeah, but I'm saying, like, someone can write a fictional character who has experiences and attributes that that author never had.
They
That's what I'm
can.
trying to say.
Yes.
They can. Yeah, and they can do it dang believably, and it can really touch people's hearts and
That's
emotions
where I would
really
say I
deeply.
don't know. That's why I don't know if they can do it believably. I think they can create a believable world with those personalities, but I think that the personalities that stand out in a great work, I can't not believe that the people who created them, that there are things that they relate with about that. Like, that it's coming from somewhere.
Well, okay, your point well taken. But I just presume, for the sake of the conversation, that's possible. That people can imagine experiences and realities that are much better than they themselves have experienced, or they themselves can create an actual life. Like, the human imagination is able to go beyond what people have inherited or are capable of actually. Right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to imagine people flying, or imagine people going to different places or different galaxies, or all to say, I think that it's possible for a really amoral, damaged person to write really moral, healthy work if they try to envision like a better reality or structure of reality, or
Right.
or they try to access truth, right? Like, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive.
So
All I'm
that's
saying, I
just
think you
nailed
should
the
judge.
difference, though.
You should judge work on its own merit. Period. Take into account the creator, but judge it on its own merit.
Before you move on from that, you just nailed, I think, where I didn't know where I was going to be, but I think we've arrived at a distinction. I don't think there is this disembodied truth that just exists on its own. Like, I used to believe that ethics and morals and beauty and all of this stuff existed on its own in some sort of platonic way. There were these forms that were out there, like numbers, and the universe kind of conforms to them, and we can create something that's beautiful on its own. But for me, it's essentially particular to the thing. Like, if I saw a painting and it was an accident, right? Like, I would react to that differently than if I knew it had a painter or somebody who had interacted with it. Do you know what I mean?
No, but that's not the question here. Like, we know people we know art has a creator, we know theology has a writer, but if that were true, if it's inherently non-separable, then if you don't know who the creator is, then you inherently can't appreciate it, because it has no interpretation.
But you have but as long as it's an anonymous creator is still a creator. An anonymous author is still an author.
But if you're saying if you don't know their character, you don't know anything about them, then you can't access the art or appreciate the art for its own sake.
You can, because we have the human situation in common.
So that's what I'm saying about crappy people who make good things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm saying the same thing.
Yeah, and it's the fact that they're tied to their art that we can relate it to it.
Well, I think those are two different questions, because I don't think crappy people are incapable of making good art, but I'm just saying that people are incapable of making art that is not reflective of some part of who they are.
Oh, I agree with that, but I still think you should be able to
separate the
appreciate the thing for itself, take into account, because I just get really frustrated with a lot of the identity politics that exists today. That honestly, if you walk into a college campus and you say the name of somebody who has deep skeletons in their closet, it's very common for students to say things like, oh, well, they were just a bad person, and I'm not even going to engage with their art, or I'm not even going to engage with their literature because there's this, and this wrong with it. Like, there's a couple bad words in there that are non-politically correct. And it really, I think it prevents people from actually critically engaging in a really holistic way. Just it is the proverbial throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, and it's a logical fallacy. It's something like appeal to smearing someone's character to discredit their work is at least in logistic academic circles, that's like a faux pas. you don't do that. You work with the thought, not the person.
Yeah, but that doesn't presume that it's disembodied truth, right? You can have that and still acknowledge that art or that thing that is created is still very much a part of this person, and take that into account as you interpret it, like you said earlier.
Yeah, like critically look at it.
Mm-hmm. But when does it get to a point where you can't even do that? So there's no line. Like let's say for instance, I think we can all agree that none of us here are fans of Donald Trump. But let's say he releases a book that is just amazing, and it's huge, and he puts it out, and it is like right up all of our, like, it is just amazing. I mean, would you even take the time to read it? I
would. If it was that good, of course I would. I would give him credit if he actually did that. I mean, I wouldn't believe that he actually wrote it, but if he actually wrote it and it was a good book, like, I really honestly think like we should take people's arguments, no matter who they are. Like, you should weigh that thing for its own self and not throw it out just because you don't happen to like the person. I mean, it's different if the person's abusive or dangerous. That's different.
Even then, I think it's important. I honestly, like, I think it's an important practice, and I do this on YouTube all the time. There are people that I find to be completely off-putting, and people I think that are totally wrong, and I could never see things from their perspective. I routinely suspend judgment and listen to their perspectives. Otherwise, I just create a little bubble for myself. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's important to engage the art and ideas and literature of people that you wildly disagree with. I read Mein Kampf when I was younger. I read everything. Yeah. Communist Manifesto, like Satanic Bible, like all these other things that, for me, it's like you're engaging people who are completely different than you is part of what this is ironic, Yoder like talked about, and that's a part of the pacifistic tradition, is that you understand the enemy or the person that you completely disagree with, by like actually thinking about what has led up to where they're at and taking those things into account, not justifying evil or wrong ever, but getting a better holistic picture of a person's life or art, I think, is always better than not.
Even if they benefit from it.
I think I agree. So there is a line there, I think.
But that's what I'm saying is, like, if Trump puts out that book, you're buying that book, and they're benefiting from you getting that.
So I wouldn't have bought Mein Kampf if Hitler was using that money for his work. You know what I mean? Like there's that's
outright supporting. That's a
different,
totally different conversation.
Yes, but it's an important question. I just think it's maybe a little bit different. Do you guys think it's different when it comes to ethics and religion and other types of art, like painting? Does it matter as much?
I think religious leaders have a different standard.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that it's a different standard that they should be held to on a certain level, but I think it makes it more difficult to hold that standard depending upon how visible the artist is with their art. Like going back to Bill Cosby, it's his face. Right. He's right there in front of us. We see that. Yoder, maybe you look at the back of the book to see his picture, but you're just like, their words are almost disembodied from the person from your perspective. So I think it's I don't think the standard should be differently, but I think that just because of who we are as humans, our approach is going to be different.
I think there's absolutely a difference. I think if someone stands up and is a self-proclaimed teacher or leader in any capacity, they're automatically held to a different standard because they're asking people to emulate and follow them. So if their life doesn't line up, if their life is full of moral, indiscretions and abusive behaviors, then they are more responsible. Bill Cosby was an entertainer. He doesn't, right? He had a lot of theoretical knowledge, and I think did he have his doctorate in early child education?
Yes.
But that's, to me, that's judging an entertainer by the same standards as like a pastor or a religious leader, or even a theologian who stands up and says, "Follow me." The thing is about artists don't presume to be leaders. In fact, they're more like the jesters of society that show the ugly underside of what society is doing and try to bring truth to light. So they're not standing up and saying, "Hey, look at me, I'm a moral person," at all.
And I think that is a definition of leadership that needs to die, personally. I went to a clergy meeting this last, maybe it doesn't need to die, but at least in my life it does. I went to a clergy meeting and they asked me how my theology has changed over the last year. And my answers were, over the last 5 years, but especially the last year, I have thought about ministry completely differently. And that's tied to how I think about how God relates to the world. And it used to be that I think ministers were these people out front, pulling the whole group, shepherding everybody. They're the under shepherds of Jesus. And they're these paragons of virtue that you emulate. And we were told, like, you can't lead someone where you've never been. And so basically the whole congregation is following the minister. Now I look at it totally differently. I'm not dragging a congregation behind me. I'm joining each and every individual who has their own particular path to follow, their own faith, their own conceptions of theology and ideas. And really it's me coming alongside and like discovering and being a partner than it is like pulling and pushing. And so I think it's tough when it comes to religion because we have lived for so long with ideas of religious leaders that have to fail, right? When the message is follow me, I've got it figured out, or I have it together, that's going to fail no matter what. Not that we can't aspire to something better, but I think the way it's been set up in the past has been unfortunate.
Going back a little bit, I have a problem with the fact that someone who's a pastor, a teacher, a theologian, that we pit them against an entertainer as the entertainer is lesser than the other person. I think that someone who's
say lesser than.
Well,
Just
not
different.
lesser, but I don't even say different as far as their influence on society. I would say that it is more of an influence, at least in our culture, what an entertainer does and the stuff that they put out there as far as like being an example or being a voice. I think maybe it's the word being an example, going back to what Alan just said, is that idea of like we expect our artists to be examples as opposed to I'm just putting this out there. And maybe that's the whole crux of it, is that our expectations for what it means for a person to put themselves out there is the part that's wrong.
No, I don't know. I disagree. I think entertainers aren't standing up on stage and telling people in a sermon, follow me as I follow Christ. I am your leader. They're
Right.
not asking people to do that. In fact, a lot of times they're like, I'm a piece of crap. Don't be like me. Like, I mean, like stand-up comics, for example, like notoriously depressed and alcoholic and have substance abuse problems and have been through like horrible things. That's why, and this is kind of what I was trying to say earlier. That's why a lot of stand-up comics become stand-up comics, because it's a way they've learned to cope with horrible things in life. And I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe people who have these double lives have been through things that gives them a certain perspective, and a sort of like a perspective that can offer us information, if not wisdom in some cases. But I want to qualify that very strongly, that doesn't justify that behavior, but it does present different perspectives that maybe we can learn from. I don't know, but I think that can be dangerous.
All right. I think that, so let's kind of, let's put this down and find out where we're at. So we all agree that you can't separate the work from the person who created it. That there's always going to be an as far as like they're interconnected on one level.
Yes and no. I think that's actually the base of our conversation, where we're kind of going around, is the question of reader response and authorial intent.
No, I think but we all agreed through that about that. It's just to what degree.
Right.
That's what we disagree on.
Yeah.
That a work can have a life of its own
outside of the despicable
the creator.
Yeah.
I worked with a professor who works with Reformation texts, and was talking about how grieved this professor is that like the students don't seem to take a lot of interest and just say, oh, those are really antiquated works. Like we don't have to learn them. And she said, texts are like, and I would say art and like works of entertainment or theology or anything that anybody creates, they're like pieces of clothing, and whoever interprets them puts them on, and they take the shape of the interpreter. They still have a lot of the handiwork. They have the handiwork and the planning and the craftsmanship of the person who made them, but they are as much the interpreter as the creator. And they'll walk around and they take their own form, and they do their own things in the world. So, if you write a book, it will take on its own life.
Yes.
It has its own trajectory in the world. It's going to do things that the author could never do. And it can encounter people that the author would never encounter, like personally, but that work encounters people. Same thing with theology. So I think it's really healthy to keep a separation there. Like otherwise we wouldn't read anybody, like we wouldn't read Martin Luther anymore because he was horribly anti-Semitic and, horrible to people. Like you would literally have to discredit like most of Western history.
So
But I don't know.
I'm with you, and I think this is great because I know what I really do think about all this now. And what it is what you said, plus the idea that you use what we know about people and their actions to interpret their work, to at least bring that into a dialogue with their body of work or their creation, whether it's Yoder or Martin Luther or Bill Cosby. When we read or encounter their work, we take that into account, but we don't let that give us the basis for just demonizing and forgetting and discrediting their work. You know, it's a more complex thing.
Well,
I wish I could say that. I wish I could say
but
that better.
Jeff's whole question this whole time is like, what level of evil does it take for us to discredit? Because in some cases,
Right.
some cases, maybe there are such horrors that you should discredit. But Alex, interesting that you read Mein Kampf. Like, people still read Hitler to this day because maybe there's something to learn from his mind. You know, like maybe there's something there.
But what happens when it's the product of like evil? Like I brought that up, and you said, we said the medical research has been sealed. I think there is a level. I think it's when the product itself was created from suffering and pain of unwilling participants. Maybe that's when you just discount the work, right?
I don't know.
I think it's still worth studying. I honestly think it's still worth studying.
The medical research from concentration camps?
No, sorry. No, no, there are some atrocities I think that we should never benefit from. There is a line,
but it's like,
but I think it's farther out than
out there. Agreed. Hey, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Wow, we agree. Look at that.
There is a line, but it's way far out there, especially for right.
I'm probably more confused now than I was when we started. I think I agree with what both of you are saying on an intellectual level, but then I sit down and try to watch the Cosby Show and I can't.
And you experience disgust.
Exactly. So so I think for stuff like that, maybe time literally does heal all wounds. Like, maybe if it was less like intellectualized, like I think I can still read Yoder and really enjoy it because I don't ever remember seeing him in my lifetime. It wasn't something that I experienced as it was happening. It's just historical fact to me that this guy did this and it's horrible, but he also wrote this. Like it's distant. It's separated from me. So their art is separated from me, or the artist is separated from me, which makes their art to be, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think that when it comes down to it practically, that there is a level, and I think that level is dependent upon our own personalities.
I mean, but how do societies determine what is taboo? Like we come to a relative consensus.
Well, our society bases it on money and PR. Like that's the sad thing too. Like, right? Because a lot of these pieces of art are controlled by corporations, and they can say, well, we're not going to put this out there because there's this overwhelming public sense of disgust against it. So we're just going to put it away, and they have the power to do it.
Well, no. That's based on public consensus, though. I'm saying, like, how does any culture, like, not just in a broad sense, determine like what is unacceptable behavior? Like, people either embrace it and say nothing and abide it, or they cry out against it collectively and put a ban on it. Like, so that's a whole process. And over time, like, that's the whole story of civil rights. It's like people protesting and saying, this is not okay. This is unacceptable. This ought to be taboo, or untabooing things that have been taboo. And because they've been taboo, they've harmed people, like, being out and gay. So as society continues to evolve, that's a process where there's a lot of shifts that take place. But I think that the element of disgust is important to listen to, but it's important also not to be ruled by in some cases, because there's a time when interracial marriage was caused people to feel physical disgust that felt wrong to them. And I don't know where I'm going with this argumentation, because I am absolutely not trying to justify horrible behavior. I'm trying to say that sometimes those signals can misfire based on how we've been socialized. So I think with anything, it's worth at least weighing and talking it out and critically reasoning with it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It does come down to honesty, I think, in the end. I think we all have an aversion to dishonesty, right? When someone presents themselves or their work in a certain way, but that's not who they really are. So I think the more honest the work is, the easier it is to have that survive falls from grace.
I like that. Yeah.
It's a really, really good point. Yeah. All right. Well, that's I'm glad you guys left this conversation with clarity because I'm still going to be thinking about this for a while. So let us know what you think. If you have anything to add to this conversation, you can go to the show notes at irenicast.com/82. That's irenicast.com/82. And for questions, comments, concerns, and suggestions for the show in general, you can always go to irenicast.com/feedback for all the ways to get a hold of us. On the other side of the music, we are going to be bringing back an old segment called Say What? So Say What is basically word association, right? Each of us have come up with...
Say what?
Exactly. Each of us have come up with 2 words, and then the other 2 hosts have to, immediately when they hear the word, to say the first thing that comes to their mind. Just raw, unfiltered. So again, this might be a situation where you have to put into practice the conversation we just had, and we could horribly offend you, and you may write us off or inspire you, and you'll tell all your friends about us, right?
Or we may disclose that we're horribly immoral.
I know.
There you go.
Defunct people.
Reinterpret our work with what you know about us. There you go. Sorry, I took the joke too far.
That's okay. We sort of have an ongoing joke that we believe that there's some psychologist out there that's listening to the show and writing this scathing paper about who we are.
I'm ready for this, Jeff.
All right, Alan, since you are so ready, Alan, why don't you go ahead and give us the first word?
All right, you ready? You have to say the very first thing that comes to your mind. Sharp.
Mind.
Knife.
Mind.
Like a sharp mind. Sharp mind. Yeah. We were just talking about like intellectualism, so.
Very nice. A sharp mind and a knife.
And I was literally just cutting up some vegetables before we recorded, so I had
I was about to ask you
my trusty chef's knife. I was thinking of a chef's knife. My beautiful Shun knife, recommended by Alton Brown himself. It's amazing. Anyway, that's what I was thinking of. And now I'm hungry. Thank you.
That's what this always ends up as. All right. Jeff, do you have one for us?
I do. Forever.
21. You guys, I honestly hate clothes shopping so much. I think it's so boring.
Wow.
Perpetuating the stereotype with that one, Mona.
I thought of like this. I saw the word forever in my mind on like a card, like a card with like 2 rings, and it had lots of pastel colors, and it was like a sunburst behind it. Mm-hmm. Oh. Did not think of Forever 21 though. I did not.
Well, I just walked by yesterday, and I so much rather, instead of going to one of those stores, I'd so much rather go to a thrift store and hunt for old crap that single-use old kitchen things that they don't make them like that anymore, or old wooden chests, or old greeting cards that have weird flowers stamped on them. I don't know why. I'm gonna be such a hoarder when I get older. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. My word is green.
I just think of grass.
Grass.
Grass. Yeah.
I thought agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So this is so interesting. When I teach people about biblical interpretation, and I use talking about hermeneutics and all the different ways words can be interpreted, I use the word green because it has a very obvious superficial meaning. But then there's actually tons of different meanings for the word green. It can mean, like you said, Jeff, envy. It can refer to foliage. It can refer to money. It can refer to being good at something, like being green at it. Mm-hmm. There's another big one that I forgot.
Being sick or environmentalism when you're being green.
Green, exactly. There's so many different interpretations of that word in particular.
Well, the only reason I thought greed was because I was trying to finish what you were going to say. You went greed, and I was like, greed. And before you finished the word. So it was more of a...
Oh.
Yeah, that's just why it came to mind. Because it was before... Maybe you just said it too slow.
I tried to say green. I should say enough.
I know. I heard you say green, but I anticipated greed before you finished.
Oh.
I had a magenta tank top in my head when you said the word. So I had to push it to the side, and literally there was grass.
You have a magenta tank top on your head?
In my head.
Oh.
because she said tank, I imagined a magenta tank top, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And then she's all green, and I was like, ah.
So then you said you pushed it aside, and there was grass on the other side. I'm
That's
wondering
right.
if the grass is greener on the other side.
It was. It absolutely was.
Right.
Totally green.
It's not easy being green, they say.
No, it's not.
It's not easy being green. Okay, who's next? Alan?
Alan, going
Yes.
back around the horn.
Here we go. Are you guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Regretful.
My
Pie.
third grade bowl cut.
That picture is great, by the way. All
No.
of those pictures
Yeah,
are fantastic.
you were there. So if you
I remember.
If you just started listening to the show, Alan's my cousin, so yeah, you would have remembered that really unfortunate bowl cut. Oh man, I got called a little boy a lot. Speaking of my gender identity awareness, I guess.
I loved that Mona though.
We'll have to post a picture of it on Instagram, I guess.
She was so lovable. I mean,
no, we fought all the time. How can you even say?
Yeah, it's because you guys got all the comfortable beds and stuff. Jeff, what'd you think of?
I said pie.
Pie.
Eating it?
He's like, man, I regret eating that pie. The whole
pie?
Like, I was flooded with the memory the last time I ate a whole pie.
Whole pie?
Hey, wasn't that one our mutual friend made? And
yes,
it was like banana.
It was banana cream pie, and it was delicious.
You can't stop with that though, because it's like homemade from like thousands of years of banana cream pie history, all down into that one gorgeous.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Okay, I had a word and then I forgot it because I'm hungry. Alarm.
Clock.
I just thought of a fire alarm on a ceiling, a little white one. The kind that you take the battery out of so it would stop beeping.
That's funny because that's exactly what I was looking at when I said that.
I literally emptied my brain, so I think I just received psychic vibes.
So we just connected, Alan.
I melded.
Guys, I used to teach K-6 music, and I set up a little stage area for the classroom and to encourage the kids to have like self-confidence and to like, get out of their shell. At the end of class, we would have stage time, and the kids could come up and perform for each other. So they could sing songs or tell jokes, whatever they want. So this one kid with these giant Coke bottle glasses he was a kindergartner. He always wanted to get up, and every week, he would raise his hand. So I finally called him, and he got up, and he was like, he stood there, like just kind of sheepishly smiling at everybody. And then he started making up his own song about everything in the room. He was like, and the ceiling is nice, and the floor. And he just kept going, singing about everything in the room. And I feel like that's what Jeff just did. It was it was so adorable.
Jeff, you're adorable.
Oh, sorry.
Adorable, Jeff.
Adorable. I bet you've never been called adorable before, have you, Jeff?
No,
Sure
I don't think I have.
When
not
you were
that I
a little
remember.
kid. When you were a little kid.
No,
you
not when I was a little kid.
It's not a word that I associate with you, Jeff.
Yeah. Well,
At least you're like silently longing to be called adorable. Then now you have
you got me. I am. All right, Mona. I think this is your word. Last one.
Yeah. All right. Ready?
Yeah.
White.
I used to think that I was
I just got really uncomfortable.
Really?
Yes.
What? How?
Because the first one that came was like privilege, and then I like questioned whether that should be the first thing I thought of, and I just got.
Such a long silence.
That's nice. That's good. I was just gonna say that I thought I was a very like creative person and very imaginative, but I'm like ruthlessly literal. Like I saw a whiteboard in my head.
Oh, that's funny because I'm staring at my whiteboard right now. It organizes
Okay.
my life. Thank you.
Hey, think of your credit card numbers right now. Ready, go. Because I want to.
Alan, you're turning your gift into something forcible.
No, stop trying to find me.
1, 6.
No, stop it.
No, I would not use telepathic powers for bad. Of course not.
I absolutely would.
No, I'm the
Just
kind
saying.
of person who goes to the dog park just to hang out with people and be around people, and I end up listening to all their problems and basically doing my job.
Yeah, but you could listen to their problems without even having to talk to them. That's like the best thing in the world.
You have to talk to them. They're not just going to tell you their problems. Like,
no, if you could read minds, that's what I'm saying. Like, you wouldn't have to.
That would be way too much pressure.
That would be the worst.
That would be the worst thing ever.
I enjoy when people open up and talk, about themselves. It's like being given a gift. It's
Calvin,
wonderful.
can I talk to you about something?
You know how many times I've heard that, like in the last week? I swear.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm gonna call you up, just tell you that, and then hang up.
Sometimes it gets me a little bit, like heart beats a little bit fast, and it's like, oh crap, what did I do? But it's
dude, totally. Whenever someone says that to me, I'm always like, I'm in trouble. That's my first inclination. I'm in trouble.
My favorite thing in ministry, and Jeff can probably attest to this, is when you get the invite to someone's house for dinner, and you're just sitting there enjoying yourself, like really enjoying these friends in this company, thinking that's what, and then like toward the end of the night, they're like, so the reason we brought you here, and you're like, oh crap.
Oh, it's the worst.
This is an intervention.
Oh no. They're like, this thing really bothered me. And then they want to, and it's like, wow, I was under the impression we were friends.
And we were having fun this whole time. At least cut to the chase, like at the beginning, and then have the fun.
Right. Yeah.
It's so awkward.
Invite me out to do something and tell me in the office. But anyway, I had a friend who did that all the time just for fun without having anything to say, but he would just ruin really good moments. So, I'm going to tell you. It was terrible. What a jerk.
Awesome. I'm going to do that to you now.
You should do it.
Oh, hey, you guys, that reminds me, actually, I have something kind of serious to bring up. That's terrible. No, I don't like it.
I think we were joking before you even started, and it still made my heart drop.
Yeah, I know. It made my heart drop, and I knew I was joking.
You're like, I don't like this.
I don't like it.
All right.
Jeff says, wow. He's like, I'm not even affected.
Things are getting weird.
You're a robot, Jeff. Sorry.
No,
Wow.
Adorable robot.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that'll do it for us this week, because I have the power to do that. If you enjoy what you hear and you want to support Irenicast, you can go to irenicast.com/support. Apparently, I don't need support because I wouldn't feel it anyway. For the many ways to show love to our other co-hosts who would appreciate your appreciation, you can check us out.
Show love to me and just tell Ellen your problems.
Absolutely.
And just ignore me. I'm not here. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thanks for joining the conversation.